The air was heavy with laughter, music, and the faint scent of roses lining the aisle. But in a single instant, everything froze. A sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of the church, its engine humming like a statement of arrival. From the back seat, Ngozi stepped out, graceful, elegant, her presence commanding the attention of every single guest. She wasn't in tears. She wasn't broken. She wasn't invisible like she had once been. Instead, she stood tall, radiant, in a fitted gown, her fingers wrapped around a sleek tablet that glowed faintly under the sunlight. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. "Why is she here? Isn't that his ex-wife?" The groom's smile collapsed in an instant, his body stiffening as though he had just seen a ghost. His bride looked around in confusion, searching for answers no one seemed willing to provide. And in that silence, one question pierced through every mind. How could a woman once abandoned with nothing return in such power and glory on the very day he tried to humiliate her? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our upcoming stories. Chike was a man who measured his worth by the shine of his cars, the size of his mansion, and the whispers of admiration he heard when he walked into a room. A wealthy businessman with connections in every corner of the city, his obsession was never truly with love, but with the status it gave him. To him, every detail of his life had to be perfect, flawless, enviable, and when he married Ngozi, many thought he had it all, a wife who was gentle, graceful, endlessly loyal. Ngozi had grown up far from riches, raised with values that placed kindness above possessions and commitment above personal gain. To her, love was not a transaction, it was a bond. For years she poured her heart into their home, serving as the quiet strength behind Chike's glittering public image. But behind those high walls of wealth, their marriage carried a silence that grew heavier with each passing day. Their dinners, marked by clinking cutlery rather than conversation, doctors' visits, turning from hopeful to haunting, with reports offering no clear answers for their childlessness. And while Ngozi fought to keep her faith alive, the outside world grew cruel. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, relatives cast her pitying glances, and in the eyes of her husband, she began to see not love, but quiet resentment. Chike's obsession with leaving behind an heir slowly turned into an obsession with blaming her. He saw her not as the woman who had stood beside him in loyalty, but as a failure, standing in the way of his legacy. Yet, what Chike did not know was that life has a way of humbling even the proudest of men, and that the tables would soon turn, and in ways no one could have ever imagined. The walls of their home, once filled with the promise of love, soon became a prison of silence and sharp words. Chike's patience thinned with every passing year, his insults no longer veiled, but cutting, deliberate, cruel. At dinners, he would glare across the table, his voice cold as steel. "Without children," he said one night, his fork clattering against the plate, "you are nothing." Ngozi's hands trembled, but she lifted her eyes and whispered softly, "But I am more than your opinion." He scoffed, pushed his chair back with disdain, leaving her alone in the flickering light of the dining room. The whispers of neighbors grew louder, and soon even family turned against her. In hushed but cruel voices, they called her barren, as though her worth was tied only to the cradle she could not fill. Every family gathering became a stage for her humiliation, and every whispered prayer felt like it fell into silence. At night, when the weight became unbearable, Ngozi would curl up in the corner of her bedroom, clutching her Bible tightly to her chest, her tears staining the fragile pages. The sound of her sobs echoed through empty halls, unheard, unnoticed, by the man who once vowed to protect her. Chike, blinded by pride, grew restless, His presence at home became rare, his tone more poisonous when he did appear. And then one morning, the blow she had long feared arrived. Papers were slammed onto the table with a thud that echoed like a death sentence. Divorce, no apology, no hesitation, only cold words. "You are holding me back." He left without a backward glance, walking away with his wealth, his pride, his ambition, leaving Ngozi with nothing but broken vows and an empty house. But that night, as her world collapsed and she felt the ground slip beneath her, something unexpected began, something that would set in motion a transformation no one could have predicted. The grand gates of the mansion closed behind her, for the last time, and Ngozi found herself carrying her few belongings into a cramped rented apartment on the edge of the city. The peeling paint on the walls, the faint smell of damp, the thin mattress on the floor, a far cry from the luxury she had once known. At first, the silence was unbearable. Every echo reminded her of the life she had lost. But in that silence, something inside her stirred. She was broken, yes, but not defeated. One evening, as she sat on the floor clutching her Bible, she noticed the tablet an old friend had given her years ago, one she had barely touched during her marriage. She powered it on, and in that glow, she saw not just a screen, but a doorway, a chance to begin again. That tablet became her lifeline. She poured herself into it, searching for knowledge as though it were oxygen. She signed up for free seminars across town, sometimes walking for hours just to save the bus fare. She watched online lectures late into the night, her small apartment lit only by the faint blue glow of the screen. Business strategies, entrepreneurship, leadership. She devoured it all. She scribbled notes on old scraps of paper, whispering ideas to herself, as though speaking them aloud could give them life. By day, she volunteered at local charities, sweeping floors, serving meals, lending a kind ear. Slowly, she began making connections, ordinary people who admired her humility, her resilience, her quiet strength. Each encounter added a thread to the network she was weaving, though at the time she hardly realized it. The nights were long, the challenges relentless, but for the first time in years, she felt alive. Each small victory became fuel, each lesson a reminder that she was more than the labels others had forced upon her. Still, she wondered if all this effort would truly amount to anything, if her past would forever overshadow her future. But then, one ordinary afternoon, while sitting in a quiet cafe with her tablet open and her notes spread across the table, an encounter occurred that would change everything. At the cafe, Ngozi sat quietly, her tablet propped up against a chipped coffee cup, her fingers scrolling through business articles, while her worn notebook lay open, filled with scribbled dreams. A man seated nearby, a seasoned entrepreneur with kind but discerning eyes, had been watching her intensity. Finally, he leaned over and said, "You read like someone preparing for a future others can't see yet." Surprised, Ngozi smiled politely, unsure how to respond. But that single conversation became the spark of something greater. This man would become her mentor, and in time, her first investor. He didn't see her as the woman abandoned by her husband. He saw her as the woman with relentless fire in her eyes. With his guidance, she took her first step into the uncertain world of business. The beginning was far from glamorous. Her small business, born from late-night planning and borrowed courage, grew slowly, each sale hard-earned. At times, the challenges seemed endless. Suppliers doubted her, clients questioned her experience, and then came the crushing blow. A partner she had trusted betrayed her, siphoning funds and leaving her on the edge of collapse. It would have been enough to break anyone who had already endured so much, but Ngozi refused to surrender. Through tears and exhaustion, she whispered to herself, I will not end where he left me. Instead of folding, she doubled down. She cut costs, worked harder, rebuilt with even greater determination. What began as survival soon turned into vision, using her tablet not just as a tool, but as the very foundation of her journey. She taught herself the world of technology, coding, digital marketing, e-commerce. Slowly, her small venture transformed into something no one could have imagined. A growing tech company that carried her name, her resilience, her unbreakable spirit. This was no longer about proving herself to Chike, or to those who had mocked her. It was about rewriting her story, on her own terms. And right now, if you're still here, drop a comment saying, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's following the story all the way. Years began to pass, and with each one, Ngozi's world shifted further from the woman who had once wept in silence. What started in a tiny apartment grew into something greater than she had ever dared to dream. She moved her business into a modest office space, just a single room at first, with second-hand desks and a flickering overhead light. But inside those walls, energy buzzed like electricity. She hired her first employee, then another, until the room overflowed with people who believed in her vision. They were loyal, not just because of the company, but because of the woman leading it, steady, compassionate, unwavering. With each new partnership, her reach stretched further. Local clients became national. And soon, her tablet connected her to international firms that valued her innovation. Then came the moment she had prayed for in secret. A crisp white document slid across her desk. A contract worth $1 million. The culmination of sleepless nights, unrelenting sacrifice, and unshakable faith. Tears welled in her eyes as she pressed her hand over the paper. She whispered into the silence, "God, you never abandon me." It was not just a victory in business, but a vindication of every tear, every insult, every moment of despair that had once threatened to drown her. While Ngozi rose far across the city, Chike was preparing for another chapter of his life. His new bride was younger, radiant, admired by society, and he paraded her like another trophy to polish his image. Invitations were sent, luxury venues booked, Rolls-Royces rented to showcase his wealth. But behind the curtain of grandeur, cracks had already begun to show. His empire was weakening, debts mounting higher than he dared to admit. To the world, he was still the successful businessman. Behind closed doors, he was a man frantically patching holes in a sinking ship. And yet, neither Chike nor Ngozi knew what fate was weaving in silence, that their paths, once violently torn apart, were about to cross again, in a reunion that would shock everyone. The morning of the wedding arrived, with grandeur. The church courtyard gleamed with floral arrangements. Violins played softly in the background, and guests in fine attire filled the air with chatter and laughter. Chike moved through the crowd with his usual swagger, shaking hands, flashing smiles, boasting about the life he had carefully constructed. To everyone who greeted him, he repeated the same phrase with pride. At last, everything is perfect. His new bride glowed by his side, while photographers captured every pose, every laugh, every carefully rehearsed gesture of a man desperate to convince the world he had won. But then, a ripple of murmurs spread through the guests. It started as a whisper, sharp enough to slice through the music. "Wait, isn't that Ngozi?" Heads turned, eyes widened. The crowd shifted toward the entrance. The sound of an engine silenced every conversation, as a sleek black Rolls-Royce glided to a stop before the church. For a moment, the entire scene seemed suspended in time. Gasps rose from the crowd. Even the bride's smile faltered, as curiosity and confusion swept across the hall. The door opened slowly, deliberately, and out stepped Ngozi. Her presence commanded the space, like a queen returning to her throne. She was radiant, dressed with elegance that spoke not of wealth alone, but of dignity hard-won. In her hand, she carried the same tablet that had once lit up her lonely apartment, the very symbol of the empire she had built from nothing. Guests stared in disbelief, some whispering, others too stunned to speak. Cheek's face drained of color, his confidence shattering in an instant. For the first time in years, he was not the man in control. And yet, the tension was only beginning, for what Ngozi revealed next left the entire hall frozen. The hall fell silent as Ngozi walked forward. Her heels echoed against the marble floor, each step measured, unhurried, certain. She stood before the crowd, her posture tall, her expression calm, not a trace of bitterness in her eyes. Lifting her voice, she began, with a softness that carried more weight than anger ever could. I came here today not to disrupt, but to congratulate. Cheek and your bride, I wish you happiness. Gasps rippled through the audience, but she continued, her words deliberate, her tone steady. Years ago, when you left me with nothing, I thought it was the end of my story, but I thank you, because in losing everything, I found the strength I never knew I had. Murmurs spread across the hall as she lifted her tablet slightly, almost as though presenting the symbol of her rebirth. This, she said, is what became of the woman you abandoned. Today, I stand before you as the founder of a company that spans across continents, with partners in cities you only dreamed of conquering. Guests exchanged stunned looks, whispers rising like waves. She's wealthier than him now, one voice hissed from the back. She owns more than half the firms he depends on, another whispered. Cheek's smile collapsed entirely, his pride crumbling before the eyes of his peers. His new bride's unease was visible, her hand tightening around his arm, as if suddenly unsure of the man she thought she had married. And then, Ngozi made her final move. The silence in the hall was heavy, every eye fixed on her, as Ngozi turned with quiet composure. She did not wait for applause, nor did she linger to witness Chika's humiliation. With her head held high, she walked through the stunned crowd, her presence commanding respect with every step. Outside, the sleek black Rolls-Royce waited. The driver opened the door, and without a glance back, she slipped inside. The car pulled away slowly, its polished surface reflecting the faces of guests still frozen in disbelief. She had entered as the woman everyone once pitied, but she left as the woman no one could ignore. She was once discarded as worthless, but in the end, she walked away not as a victim, but as a queen. Her story was no longer about the pain of rejection, but about the power of resilience. She had proven that self-worth is not defined by another's opinion, that faith can carry you through nights of despair, and that perseverance can transform even the deepest wounds into triumph. Her scars became her crown, and her losses became the foundation of her empire. And now, the question turns to you. What do you think? Did Cheek get what he deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping stories every week.